Hello everyone. Welcome back to the emotional journey of Dieuhan, a single mother, small in stature but full of determination, on her path to find her biological parents. This is not only a journey filled with hardship, but also one of rediscovery of herself, her roots, and her blood ties. Today marks an important day for Hun. She has resolved that no matter what, she must find some clue about her birth parents, whom she was separated from since childhood. Could today be a turning point in her fate? Let's follow her footsteps and find out together. After a night of makeshift but warm rest at the home of Dieuhan, a kind stranger whom Hun once helped, Dieuhan woke up early. The small, humble room, nestled in a quiet alley, was softly lit by the morning sun, which streamed through the cracks in the door, casting light on the young mother's face, still clouded by worries. Tham, her little son, was still sound asleep under the thin blanket Dieuhan had left for them. Hun gently got up, careful not to wake her son, and quietly stepped into the small kitchen. She opened the cupboard. There were only a few packets of instant noodles and some basic seasonings left. Without hesitation, Hun started preparing breakfast. A bowl of noodles with no meat, no vegetables, no eggs, yet full of heartfelt warmth. She seasoned it carefully, not to enhance the taste, but to make this breakfast a silent thank you to Dieuhan, the woman who had given her and her child a place to stay, even if just for one night. Dieuhan had also woken up, her face still drowsy, but her eyes warm as she saw Hun bustling quietly in the kitchen. The two women sat next to each other, sharing the simple meal, exchanging small stories about life, about their children, and about the dreams that once slipped away. "Are you planning to continue searching for your parents today?" Dieuhan asked while sipping a spoonful of hot broth. Hun nodded. Her eyes were full of determination, though behind them was a weariness from many days of fruitless searching. "I want to keep going, so none of this is wasted. Maybe today, there's still hope," she replied, gently brushing the hair of her son, who was now rubbing his sleepy eyes. Dieuhan paused for a moment, then said hesitantly, "I was thinking of going with you, but I have an appointment with the orchard owner today. I can't make it." Hun smiled softly. She didn't blame her, nor was she upset. She understood. Everyone has their own life, their own worries, and this journey. Perhaps she was always meant to walk it alone, just as she had for so many years. Though she was in a hurry, Hun didn't forget to help Dieuhan tidy up the house. She washed the dishes, swept the floor, watered the plants. Just small things, but done with a heart full of gratitude. To Hun, perhaps every day was a gift, a chance to love, to give, and to live more kindly. Life hadn't been easy for her, but it hadn't hardened her heart. Once everything was in order, Hun carried Tham, now awake and clinging tightly around her neck, and carefully locked the door. With a worn-out bag slung over her shoulder and her child in her arms, Dieuhan stepped out of the small alleyway. Leaving Dieuhan's house, Hun hugged Tham close to her chest and made her way through the narrow streets. She was heading to the Old Embankment Area, a place where her biological parents might once have lived. The Embankment neighborhood was run down. Many of the houses were deteriorating. their walls covered in moss and cracks, like the faded memories of her parents. But Han wasn't discouraged. She entered house after house, showing a worn-out photograph, the only picture her adoptive mother had kept, asking anyone who would listen. A middle-aged woman looked at the photo and frowned in thought. I think I've seen this person before. I'm not sure, but if it's who I'm thinking of, he used to live deep in that alley. You should go check. It's possible someone there might know. Han's heart pounded, a glimmer of hope, faint, but it was the first light after so many years of darkness. She bowed repeatedly in thanks and hurried toward the narrow, shadowy alley, her heart full of anticipation. As she walked, she glanced around anxiously, her eyes scanning every door and corner, so focused that she didn't see what was ahead. Then, she accidentally bumped into an older man, probably over 60. The bump wasn't hard, but it made him stumble slightly. He frowned, irritation flashing in his eyes, and barked, "Watch where you're going. What are you doing here anyway?" Han quickly bowed her head. "I'm sorry, Uncle. I wasn't paying attention." "Not paying attention? You barge into someone's alley carrying a baby and crashing into people. You think this is a place for you?" Before she could respond, a woman stepped out from the house nearby, neat in appearance, quick in her movements, yet with a calm and gentle gaze. "What's all the fuss, Mr. Chin? The girl barely touched you, and you're shouting like the house is on fire." She turned to Han, her face full of sympathy. "Don't mind him, dear. Mr. Chin's getting old, a bit cranky and forgetful. A little bump and he's yelling. We're used to it." Han respectfully bowed again. "It's okay, ma'am. I'm truly sorry for bumping into him. I heard someone say I might find information about my birth parents in this alley, so I came here without knowing." The woman paused, her expression softening as she looked Han over, from her sincere eyes to the child in her arms. "Come inside and have some water first. You must be tired after such a long walk," Mrs. Chin said gently, taking Han's hand and leading her into a small house nestled between two weathered walls. Han sat on an old wooden chair inside the modest home of Mr. and Mrs. Chin. The interior was cramped but tidy. In one corner stood a small tea table, above which rested a porcelain tea set, yellowed with time. Mrs. Chin poured a glass of water and placed it in front of Han, then gently asked, "Who are you looking for, dear?" Han gave a slight nod of thanks, her hand trembling as she took a small sip. Her throat, dry and burning from walking all morning, finally felt a bit of relief. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an old, worn photograph. The corners frayed, its colors faded with the years. It was the picture her adoptive mother, Tham, had given her long ago, her only clue that had led her here. "Auntie, I'm sorry to intrude, but do you know the man in this photo? His name is Hung. My adoptive mother told me my birth parents used to live in this area." Mrs. Chin took the photo, squinting her eyes as if to get a clearer look at the man's face. She stayed silent for a long moment, and the air in the room grew strangely heavy. Then suddenly, she gave a small nod. "I know him. He used to be our neighbor, lived right at the mouth of the alley, but it was a long time ago." he and his wife moved to the south, dear." As soon as she heard those words, Han felt her chest tighten. Her heart pounded in her ribcage, and her hand gripped the edge of her shirt. She repeated in a trembling voice, "They moved to the south?" Mrs. Chin nodded again, speaking slowly, as if recalling a distant memory. "Back then, I heard the couple moved to the south to search for their lost child, but it's strange, you know. That child's name was Tien, not Han." Han froze. A light dizziness swept over her, but then she steadied herself, looked up at Mrs. Chin, and choked out, "Auntie, I'm that child. My name was Tien. My adoptive mother changed it to Han so I could go to school and for easier paperwork." Mrs. Chin's eyes widened, and she let out a long sigh before saying, "Wait here, dear. I'll go out to the garden to call Mr. Chin back in." With that, she left the house, walking toward the backyard where a small vegetable garden grew, with a trellis of gourds climbing and covering the narrow path. "Mr. Chin, do you remember Mr. Hung from the old days? The one who used to live at the start of our alley? That girl earlier. She's his daughter. She came back looking for her birth parents." Mr. Chin was crouched in the backyard watering vegetables when he heard this. He froze. Spinning around, his eyes widened in surprise. "What? Hung's daughter? That girl?" Without another word, Mr. Chin dropped the hose and quickly hurried back toward the house. As soon as he stepped inside, he looked Han up and down, then came closer. "You're Hung's daughter? Let me see your hand." Han was a bit startled, but quickly placed both hands on the table. Mr. Chin took them and examined each line carefully. Suddenly, he stopped at her left wrist, where a small but deep scar remained. "That's it. You're Tien. This scar, when you were little, you used to come play at my house, climbing the tree out front. You fell and scraped your hand. Everyone remembered. One of your hands curved slightly, the other was straight. I remember it clearly." Han choked up. "I used to wonder why one of my hands was a bit bent, and why I had this scar. Now I understand." She gently clenched her hand, as if holding on to a piece of long-lost memory. Then she looked up and asked, "Uncle, do you know where my parents are now?" Mr. Chin grew pensive, his gaze drifting away from her hands and toward a distant corner, as if searching through old memories. "Your father, he was my best friend since childhood. We were so poor back then, barely making it through each day. After you went missing, he was heartbroken. He entrusted you to a woman named..." Han cut in, her voice trembling. "Was it Aunt Tham?" Mr. Chin was startled, then nodded slowly. "Yes, that's right. It was Tham. He left you with her and went off to earn a living, hoping to save enough to bring you back. But he was too poor. Tham took you and left without a word. When your father returned, no one knew where she'd gone. He was devastated and eventually moved to the south, hoping that one day you'd find your way back." By now, Han's eyes were brimming with tears. She bit her lip, trying to keep her voice from breaking. "I used to think my parents abandoned me, that they stopped looking for me. I was angry, resentful. But now that I've heard this, Uncle, I'm so relieved." Mr. Chin gently patted her shoulder. Then, as if remembering something, he said suddenly, wait, let me show you something." He hurried inside, opened an old wooden cabinet, and after a while of rummaging, took out a small box. Inside was a faded photograph, its edges slightly torn. He handed it to Han, his voice a little shaky. "This is a photo of you when you were a toddler. Your father gave it to me. He said if you ever came back, I should give it to you, so you'd know he never stopped thinking of you." Han took the photo, her hands trembling. It was an old picture of a little girl, around 2 years old, wearing a red plaid dress, short hair, chubby cheeks, smiling brightly. She stared at the photo for a long moment, then broke down in tears. Her sobs filled the small house. Mr. Chin quickly pulled a chair close and comforted her. "Don't cry, child. Your parents would be so happy to know you're safe, kind-hearted, and a mother now too. In a few days, your father might return. He told me he planned to visit the village soon. Stay with us for a few days, wait for him to come back." Han wiped her tears and gently shook her head. "Thank you so much, Aunt and Uncle, but I have a friend nearby. I'll stay with them for now." Han clutched the photo tightly to her chest, as if holding on to a precious fragment of memory she had just recovered after so many lost years. A wave of emotion rose in her heart, one she couldn't quite name. It was the feeling of belonging, of being remembered, and never truly forgotten. She bowed her head and thanked Mr. and Mrs. Chin with all her heart, then gently carried Tom out of the narrow alley. Though she had not yet met her biological parents, she now knew they had never stopped longing for her, never given up, and most importantly, she had not been forgotten. The faded photo, the old scar, and the blurry memories had come together to reveal a part of her true identity. The road ahead was still long, but at least now she had direction. She had hope. Her parents were still somewhere in the south, carrying with them the pain of separation and the hope of reunion that had lasted for years. Han's journey with little Tom was far from over, filled with hardship, but also glowing with humanity and love. Stay with Han as she continues her journey to find the home she lost, to reclaim the family she once thought time had buried.
Hân ôm chặt tấm ảnh vào ngực, như giữ lấy một mảnh ký ức quý giá, vừa mới tìm lại được sau bao năm thất lạc. Trong lòng cô dâng lên một niềm xúc động không thể gọi tên, đó là cảm giác được thuộc về, được nhớ đến và chưa từng bị lãng quên. Cô cúi đầu cảm ơn ông bà chính bằng tất cả tấm lòng, rồi bế Tôm rời khỏi con ngõ nhỏ. Dù chưa gặp lại cha mẹ ruột, nhưng cô đã biết họ vẫn luôn mong mỏi cô, chưa từng bỏ cuộc, và quan trọng nhất, cô đã không bị lãng quên. Tấm ảnh nhỏ, vết sẹo xưa và ký ức mơ hồ đã kết nối lại với nhau, giúp Hân tìm ra một phần thân thế thật sự của mình. Đoạn đường phía trước vẫn còn dài, nhưng ít nhất giờ đây cô đã có phương hướng, đã có hy vọng. Cha mẹ cô vẫn đang ở đâu đó trong miền Nam, mang theo nỗi nhớ day dứt và chờ đợi suốt bao năm. Cuộc hành trình của Hân và Tôm vẫn đang tiếp diễn, đầy gian nan nhưng rực rỡ tình người.